afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing?
Good.
All right. There's one little typo. It should say Matt Allen right there.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
You have Alan or you just Matt?
My fault.
Like,
You could just do simply Matt. It's fine. Smart contracts. I wanted to admit to you guys that before my research and before my presentation, I really kind of felt like it was an elusive concept. And it really I was having trouble making sense of it. So my main goal today, and along with Michael, is to solidify any confusion you might have still about the blockchain and how smart contracts play onto that. I will report that yesterday I was able to call my grandmother after putting this all together, someone who doesn't even own a computer, and practice and explain to her and get her to understand what a smart contract is. So maybe after today, you can all call your grandmother.
Was she after that? Or
She was, but she was like, I don't need to do any business, so. Sorry. So we're going to set the stage first, and this is for the evolution of smart contracts. We're going to go back in time to the year 2010. So let's take a look at this clip.
Doing good. I was wondering, will you be accepting Bitcoin?
Well, I don't know what that is, but it's got a coin in it, and my cash register doesn't, so yeah.
Wait, what's Bitcoin?
It's a new online currency that's been developed. It's just like actual money, except you can't see it, hold it, or spend it on anything.
Sounds like the kind of money I'm familiar with.
If it's not tangible, how do you know it's not just going to vanish tomorrow?
Really? You're dating Penny and you're gonna poke at something that could vanish tomorrow?
I'll buy some Bitcoin. I just came in for a little extra money when my dad raised my allowance.
You don't have to buy Bitcoin, you can mine it.
Mine it? Like mining gold?
Sort of. There's a limited amount, and we find it not by tunneling into the earth, but by using a computer to solve complex mathematical problems.
So let me get this straight. We have to write an elaborate program in order to find a fake coin that we can't spend on anything?
Yes.
So that was year 2010. Back then, his friends didn't even know what Bitcoin was. It's now 2018. You probably walk outside on the sidewalk, run into someone, say Bitcoin, they'll know what you're talking about. The same way that Sheldon was able to enlighten his friends, we want to enlighten you today about smart contracts. Because if you notice right here, smart contracts are just beginning on the Gartner Hype curve with their innovation cycle. The topics for today's presentation, there are four main topics. We're going to touch on what are the current issues that we're facing with contracts and how smart contracts might resolve those issues. We're going to touch on the brief history of blockchain and then explain the evolution of smart contracts in the process. If you look over here, this photo is a mirror image. Basically, it's about time for us to evolve out of doing business the same way that we've always done prehistorically by shaking hands and writing things up and moving ahead to a whole different digital level. So current contracts need intermediaries, and intermediaries are third-party trusted parties. In the past, historically, these have been tribe elders. I don't know about you, but I trust the guy maybe in the middle the most. So, but presently, we have people like, or companies like banks, lawyers, and courts who are acting as intermediaries today. With computers and the internet coming along, these intermediaries have been able to grow to a much larger global scale. Not only do we have the traditional ones, like banks that we just mentioned, however, we've moved on to disruptive intermediaries like Google, Airbnb, Amazon, and these are all intermediaries, but they make it, they sidestep the current traditional ones. The key point here, though, is that the size, with size sometimes comes some issues.
So I promise we'll get to what a smart contract is in a second, but first we need to go over what are the problems with the current contracts and current intermediaries. So the two main issues are trust or lack of trust, in that they use a centralized database. So the first issue is trust. So a couple years ago, I bought a house, and it was an awful experience. I didn't, trust my lawyer. I didn't trust the bank. I went into the bank, and each bank was my best friend. Oh, this is your best rate. They didn't really have my best interest. Same with my attorney. He was charging these fees. He came up with these crazy closing costs, and it just wasn't overall positive experience. So back to the banks with the large institutions, as Brian was saying, they're growing globally. They're so large that they can influence government policy, and when they fail, the economy collapses. So the government has to step in and bail them out. So with that comes corruption. So the companies are run by humans, and we tend to be a little corrupt and try to make a few bucks in the process. So the next issue is that they use a centralized database. So you have one central data point where hackers kind of want to zone in on. So if they can get to that point, they have access to the entire network. So you can see most recently we had the Equifax hack, which exposed 143 million Americans. The largest was Yahoo, which was 1 billion, but we just saw an article which that increased now to about 3 billion accounts that were exposed. So the other issue with contracts is privacy. So every transaction you have is kept in that bank's database, again on that centralized system. So if it is hacked, we're able to have access to all those transactions. So how can we resolve these trust issues? So Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin, which we saw in the clip before. And what that did is allowed untrusted individuals, people who didn't know each other, to transfer value without an intermediary or without a middleman. And what he did, he had the ledger of transactions. So instead of it being centralized, he had this ledger called blockchain, which we keep hearing all the time. And I'll discuss a little more about blockchain in a minute. So on the blockchain, we created a decentralized database, which I'll touch on in a second. But what that did was remove the distrust component, and it allowed the data to be protected in a distributed manner. So again, creating that decentralized system led to the contract being immutable. And when I first read that, I, to be honest with you, I had no idea what immutable meant, so I had to look it up, and I'm not embarrassed by that. But essentially, it just means that it can't be changed. So once, on the smart contract, once it's implemented, it can't be altered, it can't be tampered with without you knowing. And then also the decentralized network allowed for distribution. So it's distributed across the network, it's on multiple computers, multiple users have access to it. So you can see with the centralized system there, you have that one central point and everything kind of branches out from it. Where the decentralized system, you have different branches, and it's harder to hack. So our distinguished professor discussing the evolution of the ledger. So it discusses why the security issues, of the current ledgers kind of led to this new evolution of what we call the distributed ledger. I thought that was a good picture. All right, so I know Kathy and Helen touched on blockchain last week. So I personally still don't fully understand it, but this graphic in the bottom kind of helped me wrap my head around how it was secure. So thank you, Kathy and Helen. I'm just going to do a quick review. So blockchain is distributed ledger open to anyone. So we can all log in our computers, we can download it, and we can all have access to it. And each block then contains, a certain amount of information. So it contains the sender's information, the receiver's info, and then, the Bitcoin amount, and also something called hash. So your hash is basically the block's, fingerprint. It's what makes it unique. So each block contains its own hash, its own fingerprint, and then the hash of the previous block. So that's what makes it secure. So if you see block number 2, if that block was hacked or if that was altered in some way, block number 3 picks up on that. It flags it because the hashes don't match. So that's what and then all subsequent blocks after that would be invalidated until you sort things out. So that's kind of how the blockchain is secured and stop people from hacking and disrupting it. So again, each one of those blocks is verified with what they call a node, and a node is essentially just a node user. And using blockchain is faster, cheaper, and like I said, it's more secure.
All right, I'd like to draw everyone's attention over here to this diagram. We just touched on Bitcoin, which is a digital currency. And last week, like Professor was explaining, these are applications, these 4 areas that lie in or on the blockchain. So the issue that we ran into is that the way that the tech community looked at it was they looked at Bitcoin as the first experiment with blockchain. Will people actually use and engage and be one of those node members that Michael just described and join the community? And it was successful. Now at this point though, people decided, well, if we can trade currency, what about trading things of value? Perhaps a will, perhaps a marriage certificate, different things that we no longer have to put in safety deposit box at banks. And the main issue was the Bitcoin blockchain, the way it was written, didn't have the capabilities to add these other applications. They needed a little bit more complex language in order to create and store the rules necessary for smart contracts. So here we have the solution. This gentleman, Vitalik Buterin, created Ethereum and with the Ethereum blockchain. It was a whole entire new platform created from the ground up, and its main purpose was to hold and be able to do these more complex business transactions, also known as smart contracts. Ethereum right now is becoming very revolutionary in many ways, and so let's hear what Vitalik actually has to say himself.
Explain to me why this technology is so transformational that people think it'll change the world.
Because they represent kind of epochal changes in the options that we have for interacting with each other. With Bitcoin, it's you don't need banks to send money anymore. It's just something that happens directly peer-to-peer. And Ethereum extends that to making digital enforceable agreements.
But that changes whole industries, doesn't it?
And it hasn't yet, but we'll see.
Do you feel like the destroyer of worlds here? I mean, you can essentially eliminate how many jobs by doing that?
Make destroyer of jobs, creator of better ones.
Because that's pretty good.
All right, so as we already mentioned, currently Ethereum is the main blockchain for smart contracts. Who's to say if another blockchain will come along in the future? Don't know yet. But the main issues that he touched on was that Ethereum extends that to making digital enforceable agreements, and that right there, he meant peer-to-peer. You no longer need those intermediaries that we spoke about earlier. The other key point is destroyer of jobs, creator of better ones. So it's not something necessarily to fear. Now that we have a platform to create smart contracts, what exactly are they? A very simple definition is smart means that they're a little bit more efficient than that old written style up there, and we get to put them in a digital format. The contract itself is that proof of the agreement. These agreements currently executed on Ethereum blockchain. A more formal definition down here, given by a gentleman named Nick Szabo, who is known as a titan in the blockchain industry, is that a smart contract is a set of promises specified in legal form, including protocols within which the parties perform on these promises. So as Michael sort of narrowed down already, smart contracts have different properties. He touched on the cost effectiveness, the automatic, the distributed, the immutable. We created this little acronym, CC Audit, so you can perhaps, if you ever wanted to memorize, we didn't find that anywhere, so that is not research or anything like that, we just created it. But the top one that I'm about to discuss is this conditional nature, or this property that smart contracts have, and why it's so important. So the conditional nature of smart contracts. Very, very simply, there are a set of rules on the blockchain, and these create the conditions necessary for these transactions. The best part is that they're executed automatically, and simply put, I don't know about you, but if then, this reminded me of 5th grade geometry class with proofs. Like if this happens, then that has to happen. For example, if my dog Rebel here is a good girl. She gets walked off her leash in the park. And we already know that if Mochi wears his service dog vest, he gets to travel.
Alright, so back to my house buying experience. This top figure kind of shows what I went through. So if I was buying a house with Bob, I had to go through, the lawyers, the brokers, a whole, bunch of people to, to purchase my house, and I had to, put trust in those individuals. Had I gone through a smart contract, it would just be between, myself and Bob. We could come up with these, if-then rules. We would establish the rules beforehand. I could say, Bob, if I give you 20% down, you're going to sell me the house. And then same thing, Bob, you're going to fix the air conditioner in order for me to purchase the house. And all that would be, written in code and run on the Ethereum blockchain. And then just have a quick video that kind of just summarizes me. Maybe we don't.
Basically, the video just recaps everything that we just touched on. We just thought it was a nice way to tie it all together. I don't know about you, but I like hearing things in different formats, and sometimes the video can summarize it and put a little bow on it at the end.
So I just created this dope website with Wix. Let me show you how I did it. First up,
smart contracts give funds until a certain goal is reached. The smart contracts are very popular nowadays, but what are they and what problems do they solve? The term smart contract was first used by Nick Szabo in 1997, long before Bitcoin was created. He is a computer scientist, law scholar, and cryptographer, so I'll spare you his exact words. But in simple terms, he wanted to use a distributed ledger to store contracts. Now, smart contracts are just like contracts in the real world. The only difference is that they are completely digital. In fact, a smart contract is actually a tiny computer program that is stored inside of a blockchain. Let's take a look at an example to understand how smart contracts work. You probably are familiar with Kickstarter, the large fundraising platform. Product teams can go to Kickstarter, create a project, set a funding goal, and start collecting money from others who believe in the idea. Kickstarter is essentially a third party that sits in between product teams and supporters. This means that both of them need to trust Kickstarter to handle their money correctly. If the project gets successfully funded, the project team expects Kickstarter to give them their money. On the other hand, supporters want their money to go to the project if it was funded, or to get a refund when it hasn't reached its goals. Both the product team and its supporters have to trust Kickstarter. But with smart contracts, we can build a similar system that doesn't require a third party like Kickstarter. So let's create a smart contract for this. We can program the smart contract so that it holds all the received funds until a certain goal is reached. The supporters of a project can now transfer their money to the smart contract. If the project gets fully funded, the contract automatically passes the money to the creator of the project. And if the project fails to meet these goals, then the money automatically goes back to the supporters. Pretty awesome, right? And because smart contracts are stored inside a blockchain, everything is completely distributed. With this technique, no one is in control of the money.
And that concludes our presentation. Quick question. Who's going to call their grandmother after this presentation and be able to explain smart contracts?
Well, you can call Mochi if you want.
Yeah. Did you have a question, Phil?
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry. Any questions? Sure.
So this is like a relatively new idea. Has there ever been a case where the smart contract was made and then someone received it and they brought it to court, or has not been that?
I I was unable to locate any research on that as of yet. I'm not quite sure. I think really the way these transactions have been engaged in is behind the scenes at the moment, or on the side, or with the understanding that it would automatically execute.
I'll make a comment. I read this on the newspaper, so this is not so reliable. But I think they had like a $40 million violation of smart contracts. It seems that the reason for that was that the code on the contract was incorrect. Not that the idea of smart contract were violated, but when they loaded the contract onto the blockchain, the contract was fallacious itself. So blockchain doesn't guarantee you that someone doesn't put something that is screwed up in the blockchain. Blockchain only protects you from that being adulterated. So what you put there as a problem, the problem remains. And I think that's what it is. So this wasn't a breach of blockchain. This was a breach on the program that ran this particular smart contract.
Is that the DAO that you're talking about?
I think so.
Yeah. The DAO stood for, it was an attempt at organizing distributed automatic organization. It was basically going to create almost like a mini government behind the scenes as to what are the rules that we're going to run for smart contracts. And it was going to be run on an open source platform, meaning not by one particular nation or one particular government, but every engineer who was participating in that blockchain in particular. So anyone can join if they invested at the time currency. And they all invested their money, but what happened was, like you just mentioned, they wrote the contract wrong. And so the program that someone wrote had a flaw in it. It had nothing to do, though, with a flaw in the actual blockchain itself, or Ethereum.
So it doesn't mean it had a flaw. It could be a deliberate fraudulent program. That's what.
The funniest part to the story was that everyone on the platform was watching their money get stolen by someone, but they didn't know who. They were like, there goes the money, and they just kept like traveling, and they watched it in the ledger moving and moving, but they couldn't do anything about it. And they started asking the question on a larger scale, what do we do in the case next time if this happens again?
So one more comment. He mentioned Nick Szabo. And first, it's not Szabo, it's Szabo. I'm getting it. Okay, and Nick is Miklos. Okay, to begin with. Second thing, Mr. Szabo, in what was the year, 96? 94, he wrote an article, very short article, right? And basically arguing for smart contracts. So what is smart contracts? Basically code that enforce, very well explained by Matt here, explains this idea of writing conditional code that is not stochastic into rules. Okay, so it didn't need blockchain, but blockchain came in and made this much practical and protected and etc. So it became a very big thing. Now the other thing that's kind of interesting is that no one knows who Mr. Nakamoto, who created blockchain, is. But there are three big suspects. There are people that very early on the life of blockchain talked about it and did technical improvements on it. And one of the biggest suspect is Nick Szabo. And so people, and the person who created Bitcoin theoretically has $10 billion in the bank or in Bitcoin. And so he might be a very rich guy. And I have an actual video of him talking about smart contracts. I gave it to Abby and she'll post it somewhere that you can get it if you want. He's not particularly appealing. He's not very, I would say, charismatic speaker. But you know, very interesting guy, kind of non-particularly distinguished scholar, but he might have been on the side doing some very, very interesting things. So this is very kind of tantalizing. A lot of people like to talk about who is Mr. Nakamoto, because he has been, I think it's not $10 billion anymore because the Bitcoin has taken a big plunge, but it's still a few billion dollars. You wouldn't mind having it, would you? Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Michael.
there's actually two different perspectives that we're briefly going to look at. The first is how auditors will need to audit the blockchain and smart contracts as a system, because this is going to create a new type of IT audit, a new type of assurance service. And the second is a little bit more disruptive. It talks more about how we can use these technologies as auditors, or how we can leverage these technologies to improve audit effectiveness as well as audit reporting. So I'm going to skip some of what I have in the slide because Brian and Michael, they did a really good job of describing what blockchain is. But I did want to emphasize, one of the reasons why blockchain technology is so popular is because it enables trust in a trustless environment, right? So any two parties that want to transact or send information to each other, they can do this without the need for trust, right? So some of the key characteristics in the blockchain, it's decentralization, right? This is a peer-to-peer network. So if you think about it in terms of how Dropbox works or how Google Drive works, right? You can see the folders that your colleagues have created. The only difference with the blockchain is that you cannot change this information, right? Because it's secured by the hashing and the consensus mechanism. The blockchain is also immutable. So we know that immutability, that it refers to the proof of work. We're talking about the Bitcoin network. This proof of work ensures that transactions cannot be changed. Transactions could be changed, but it's very difficult to reverse the transactions that have been posted. So this is why we refer to the blockchain as an immutable ledger. Right? Because if we want to change a current transaction, we have to go back to all the previous transactions to change them, which will require a lot of computational power. So this is, as you can see here, this is why the blockchain is very attractive to auditors, right? Because what do auditors look for? They look for a very robust audit trail, right? So in the blockchain, you have a history of all the transactions. And then finally, in the blockchain, we have accountability, because part of the hash includes the digital signature of the sender of that transaction. So we can link that digital signature to the actual user that sends that transaction. There are also many different types of blockchain, right? There's hybrid chains, side chains. Every day I hear about different types of blockchain. But the prevalent ones are the public and permissionless blockchain, which is, the Bitcoin network is a good example of that. The Bitcoin network, anybody that wants to participate, they can do so. They can be a miner, they can send or receive transactions, right? But for companies, they may be willing to try out the private and permission type blockchain, because this limits the number of users that can share information, whether these are internal users or external users, and their access rights are predetermined. So here I just wanted to show you an example of a centralized ledger and then contrast that to the distributed blockchain ledger. So let us assume that we have two banks and two customers, and they engage in borrowing or lending transactions with each other, right? You can see that all these different parties, they have their own centralized and private ledgers. And you can see how this can create some inefficiencies and also some room for potential manipulation, right? So there's at least 10 records that can be recorded across all these different forms and for centralized ledgers. Now, if these parties were to transact in the blockchain, you see that each of them, they can download a local copy of their own blockchain database, and they would have this universal view of all the borrowing or lending transactions. So this could actually help mitigate the risk of fraud or error, right? Because if one of these parties, if they think that video, it's a quick video, how the blockchain works and some of its potential applications.
The internet can send baby photos and cat videos across the globe instantly, but many important things still move slowly. It can take days to send money across borders, for example. Banks must rely on middlemen to check transactions are valid. Blockchains might get important stuff moving faster by helping organizations work together more easily. A blockchain is a digital record or ledger like a database. It can securely store and verify data about the world, like who owns money or property. Built-in cryptography ensures that only people authorized to do so can make changes to the data. Blockchains can be operated by many people or organizations working together. A shared secured system makes it easier for companies to collaborate than when data is stuck inside walled-off private databases. Digital currency Bitcoin is built on a blockchain powered by thousands of computers around the world. Anyone can use Bitcoin software to send or receive payments. No bank required. Companies are now adopting blockchain-style systems to make transferring real money around the world faster. And blockchains can help move more than just money. They might make electronic health records more portable, for example. If health providers jointly operate a blockchain, it could be easier for patients to transfer their records from place to place. The security features of blockchains could aid detection of errors in patient files. Government and organizations like the UN are also investigating how blockchains can have humanitarian applications, like providing financial infrastructure for people not served by banks.
Alright, so as you can see, there's many other blockchain applications other than cryptocurrency. But to provide some more context as to how transactions can be posted, I just wanted to show you an example of sending cryptocurrency on the Bitcoin. So let us assume that the payer has to pay the payee for a specific product or service that they have provided to the payer. So the payer, they would initiate a Bitcoin transaction from their digital wallet with cryptocurrency. Then the Bitcoin, it would get broadcast to the Bitcoin network, and once it's in the network, the miners, right? The miners use their computational resources to compute what is called a proof of work, which is the hash mechanism, right? So they would pick up this transaction or other transactions and combine these into a block, right? But before the transaction gets posted to the blockchain, the miner has to perform or solve for the mathematical function. And if they are successful at that, they get rewarded, I believe, 25 Bitcoins, and the transaction can be posted to the blockchain, and the payee, they get their cryptocurrency. So now that we know how the blockchain works and some of its key characteristics, let us talk about smart contracts. So smart contracts are essentially autonomous software agents that perform the actions of the human user. So how many of you have used the kayak.com or Expedia? So that would be an example of an autonomous software agent, right? Because you enter specific criteria, like you're searching for a flight, and then you get results from different websites like Priceline, Flight.com, etc. So that's how you can think of an autonomous software agent. It's a computer program that does something for you. So Sally came up with this concept in 1994, and he describes smart contracts as very significant or substantial, and this is because the smart contract monitoring power is distributed to all the participating nodes on the blockchain, and it's not limited to just one party that has to make sure that the contract logic is correct. So this is why we're seeing a lot of different applications of blockchain and smart contracts.
As the Internet of Things continues to grow at a rapid rate, sensors and devices are becoming more commonplace to communicate information. In business networks where data such as location, temperature, or other properties needs to be shared, a private blockchain ledger can help create a tamper-resistant record. This opens up new ways of automating business processes among partners without setting up a costly, centralized IT infrastructure. And all participants have access to the same data. Let's look at how supply chains benefit when data is shared through a private blockchain. The IoT-enabled package transmits required status information as it passes through multiple carriers. The business contract specifies the conditions that must be met during the shipment from the factory to the grocery store, and all parties must adhere to the terms of the contract. A temperature sensor embedded in the package stores the data locally and sends it to the private blockchain through the Watson IoT platform at waypoints upon receiving connectivity. Information is shared across all peers. In this example, both Carrier 1 and Carrier 2 met the contractual obligations and the shipment arrived at its final destination without exposure to excess temperatures. Using blockchain allowed all business partners to access the same temperature data without requiring central control. The result? A happy customer with peace of mind about the food in his or her cart.
All right, so that's an example of a blockchain smart contract for a supply chain. So we can link the IoT, which I'm sure you all learned about in this class, right, to a blockchain smart contract, which it's a very interesting use of a blockchain smart contract. So, Silicon Valley was really used about machine learning, and now they're starting to get very crazy about blockchain, right? It's like everything on the blockchain. So how do we evolve auditing with blockchain and smart contracts? Well, first let us understand why there is a need to do this, right? And we know that there are many new technologies out there that have pressured businesses to essentially change their business practices, right? To improve process efficiency particularly. So, businesses are using technologies like deep learning to improve progress assessments. Companies are also using robotic process automation. We're also starting to see the use of deep learning or AI and RPA in the auditing profession, right? So why not use blockchain and smart contracts for auditing? So what the blockchain has shown to provide a very robust, tamper-proof audit trail, and when we combine that with smart contracts, the blockchain can improve business practices, right? This is what we saw in the last short video, that these blockchain smart contracts, they can successfully monitor and execute the terms and bills of lading, right? So let's assume that there is a supply chain blockchain, right? So all the users on this supply chain blockchain, they will be able to track when the title of the goods passes from one party to the other. And they can also track the location of the goods when we link it to IoT data. So when thinking about how these technologies, how blockchain and smart contracts are going to disrupt the auditing profession, there's two perspectives to that, right? One is how do we audit, how do we as auditors provide assurance over the blockchain and smart contracts, and the other is how do we use these tools, how do we leverage these tools as audit data analytic kind of tools to improve audit quality as well as audit reporting. So this is what we talk about in the rest of the presentation. So how do we audit the blockchain and smart contracts? There are actually new risks, and because there would be new risks, there would be new controls that emerge in a blockchain and smart contract environment. So actually auditing firms, they are starting to recognize, well, our clients, they have a blockchain environment, so between the blockchain world and the outside world. Because some data is stored in these oracles and then transferred to the blockchain, we want to make sure that the data that it reconciles, right, from what is on the blockchain versus what's outside of the blockchain. And then cybersecurity, right? Professor Miklos talked about the doubt, right? If there's an error in the smart contract, that's obviously a cybersecurity issue. I think last night I saw on my Twitter feed that there was some kind of scam on the Ethereum platform about how I think some organization, they were sending communications to Ethereum owners asking them for their digital wallets and their private keys. But obviously they're not going to explicitly ask for the private keys, but they were, I think they call it spoofing, right? It's like when you get spam emails saying this is the IRS, you know, you're gonna get arrested if you don't pay, click here. So that's like the kind of scam that's going on the Ethereum platform right now. Yes?
Is Oracle, do you mean the company Oracle?
No,
or is that
these
completely
are,
separate?
this is separate, it's oracles. It's where the data, like let's say I want to transfer data from an ERP to the blockchain, I would need to put it in an oracle before I put it on the blockchain. Sure.
Data transfer mechanism.
Yes.
The mechanism transfer between the blockchain and other things. They call it Oracle. I actually agree with you. There's a bad name for it because people immediately think of the relational database.
Yeah, I don't like that name. You had a question?
Yes. My question is like happens to me like when I watch the Brian and Mike's presentation. There's a picture about like the previously when a person who wants to mortgage to buy a house, like they have to go through like the banker, broker, the lawyer and others. And then like it seems like to me after your presentation, it seems like to me like it is kind of like centralize all the processing, like maybe to the auditing firms, and then decentralize like the access permit for people like who involved in the business to look through all the data. Is it correct for the, or do you understand my question maybe because of
Are you asking if it reduces the number of intermediaries like the
my question was
lawyers
like
or?
my question was like for the smart contract to me is kind of like it actually centralized all the authority of processing all the data for all of the customers, and no matter like it's customers or like the merchants or others to the centralization, like only the smart contract can do that. But after all the process has finished, like all the customers who related with this contract have access to look through like all the data, such as like all the customers can look through like the temperature of the milk, like you showed, and that's kind of like decentralized the access code like for people.
It's decentralized centralization. That's what you're referring to, because we can see the same information, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
But still, it's like for the. I'm sorry, I took too much time.
No.
I was kind of worried, like because like the smart contract to me is like kind of like make the contract have the authority to manipulate, or another word like to access to the all the data to process, and then like decentralize the authority for people like to look through like the result.
Well, the smart contract doesn't process the data, right? So once the smart contract gets loaded to the blockchain, if it's my smart contract, I would invoke the smart contract by sending data from my digital wallet, and the smart contract automatically performs whatever functions it needs to perform. So the user, they still have ownership of the data. Now the only difference, or I would have to emphasize, is that you would, if I'm the user in the blockchain and I have a smart contract with you, you would be able to see the smart contract, right? Because it's transparency on the blockchain, and you would see all the data that I send to the smart contract. But you can only, if we're using a private information blockchain, if you and I are the only nodes, only you and I can see that information. Does that answer
It seems like all the work previously, like as the picture said, like all the like when you want to mortgage for a house, like all the work is made done by the lawyer, the banker, and the brokers. But however, after the smart contract, all the work is done by the programmers who
Oh,
coding.
I see your point. Well, not really, because you still need lawyers to make sure the terms of the contract
Right,
are
but only
reflected
in the-
properly, and they need to draft up the contracts.
Yes.
So the execution would be automated, but the development of the contract itself, it wouldn't.
It seems for me like all the lawyers and all the bankers are going to do like essential works to put their efforts in the essential, and then afterwards it's all
Exactly.
automatically.
Exactly, yeah, that would be
Okay.
a good way to think about it.
It's going to take a lot of jobs away
Yeah.
from lawyers. Like I am afraid now that it'll take a lot of jobs away from accountants and auditors. I think I said this last time here. How many people repaired cell phones 20 years ago? Zero. How many people wrote blockchains? Zero. So it's a kind of natural evolution of technology. Jobs disappear, other jobs reappear. The quantification of these ratios is very difficult to predict. I don't think anyone can. One of our projects here, I mentioned it before too, Ian's project looks at contracts. And what it does is look at, AT&T has 20,000 contracts with retailers that sell telephones, that sell AT&T services. Each one of those contracts is supposed to be a template from a basic contract. Turns out that lawyers change it because they bill by hour. So the more time they put into something, more money they make. So they come up with a lot of changes in the clauses. And some of those are very dangerous clauses, maybe even ill-willed clauses where the lawyer is opening a litigation venue for his clients. In Brazil, we found this. We did a study looking at litigations against Itau-Unibanco. And what we found is that there were certain clusters in states where there was a lot of litigation about some particular thing. And that particular thing, it became very obvious to us that the lawyers saw a situation where the bank was losing and got a lot of people to sue that way, and I'm sure they got some cut. I don't know if that has been proved or not. But that's really kind of bad real lawyers. The less bad real lawyers just keep changing little contracts here and there. The other thing is JP's dissertation, which is, the US has been accused of being rule-based accounting standards. Europe is principle-based. But please ask me if a computer can deal with principles. So what does it happen? Happens that ultimately a lease or a contract goes into a set of rules that decide the type of lease and the treatment and etc. Who writes those things? Exactly what you just said. A programmer is not a lawyer. Lawyer doesn't know how to write. Some lawyers can write code, but not many of them. And so a lawyer wrote that particular contract or that particular standard, and the standard is very fuzzy. Okay, and what happens? Programmers will come in and put it into Oracle, put it into SAP, and they'll have to make decisions because I call it weasel language. I am in a committee, he's in a committee. I want this, you want that. I want this, you want that. So we finish up agreeing on wording, but the wording is not a definitive yes or no logical thing. It's weasel language, as I call it. And contracts cannot do, computers cannot do that, deal with that. So the programmer here then will come in and decide what it is. What JP did, JP Crahal's dissertation did, he picked up the lease rule and tried to program it into autocode to show and was very difficult. And he then went into the standards of the FASB and discovered that there were 18 amendments to the lease rule when it just started, because the programmers, the companies could not implement it without clarification. And I think this is true not only in the lease standard, but it's true in a lot of things that lawyers write. It's ambiguous language and et cetera, et cetera. You know, there might be an artificial intelligence device that eventually will do intelligent contract resolution. But I think is not here in the next 20 years. So what the problem is? The problem is that the contracts has to be deterministic, has to be very clear, very, very clear, exactly the conditions. And I think that deals with your question, correct?
Yes.
I feel like you're kind of just adding a middleman by using a smart contract in that house example.
A little bit louder.
I feel like you're just adding a middleman when you're using a smart contract in like that house example, because now I have a lawyer who's necessary for the contract, a banker who's necessary for the loan, and now I need a programmer who's necessary to make the smart contract. So aren't I just adding another middleman instead of taking away from all the confusion that's already going on?
Let Dre answer.
I was thinking about that. You have to think about the benefit in the long term, right? So if we have lawyers to draft up, I don't know, house contracts or real estate contracts, they, you know, we do need a programmer to load that to the blockchain as a smart contract. But, you know, as in terms of a contract I do, then the lawyer doesn't need to keep track of that, right? The smart contract would automatically keep track of that. So we have to, you know, this is why there's many different smart contract applications, but you're right, sometimes the benefit may not be as great as we think it may be. So that's actually a good point. But there are some applications where the benefit of having a smart contract on the blockchain would exceed the cost. All right, so I wanted to show you some examples of what the some of the big four are doing in relation to blockchain. Right, so actually Deloitte, they were one of the first to successfully complete a blockchain audit. They did this last year, 27th February, I think. And the blockchain audit that they performed, they believe that it satisfied the requirements of auditing standards. However, how they did this is not disclosed because this was their intellectual property, right? More recently, you have probably seen some articles about this at PwC. They recognize there's a problem, right? The problem is that many of their clients have blockchain, so what do we do with that? Let's audit the blockchain. So recently they launched this new service to audit the blockchain system. EY, they came up with this EY blockchain analyzer to directly extract the data from the blockchain, and in that way they're able to execute a different or various types of audit data analytics outside of the blockchain. So that's
Only KPMG is not there.
I don't know. I think they're doing something from the advisory side of it, but from the assurance part of it, I haven't
Yeah,
seen.
actually, this conference I was in Italy, there was a KPMG guy saying talking about that. I have to find this.
From the advisory side?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that was auditing the blockchain and smart contracts as a system. So I want to switch gears a little bit and kind of get you thinking about how we can use these technologies as audit data analytic tools to improve the way or change the way that audits are performed, which by the inherent nature of blockchain, it would also change the way that audits are delivered. Right, so in the future, we envision that there's going to be a series of blockchains, which is what we refer to as this blockchain ecosystem. So at the bottom, what you see is a company's blockchain, and the top is what we propose as the external auditor blockchain. And so the company's blockchain, the company, they set up their own blockchain to provide access to the parties that they do business with, to the banks, to customers, suppliers, etc. And the auditor auditor can extract this data and load it directly to their blockchain. Now, the auditor can set up their blockchain and give access to key investors, to its public parties, right? Because they want timely, relevant, and reliable information, right? PCAOB would also benefit from being a node on the blockchain because they're always looking for ways to improve their inspection processes, which would lead to better audit quality. We also have nodes like the SEC and the audit committee that could potentially benefit from being nodes on the auditor's blockchain. So once the auditor loads the business data onto their own blockchain, they can have these smart contracts, these smart audit procedures automatically execute audit tests on their behalf, right? Because these are the autonomous software agents. Right, so here we have this external audit blockchain ecosystem for revenue, and essentially what we show here is that auditors, they still have to perform their audits using a risk-based approach, right? Because that's the purpose of the audit, to make sure that you provide reasonable assurance to reduce the risk of making mistakes. So these are some of the common risks that are present for manufacturing or retail clients, and we link those to search engines and also to possible smart audit procedures that auditors could load to their external auditor blockchain. Okay, so we have an example of having a smart internal control test that can match the terms of client smart contract from the previous period to the terms of a current year smart contract to make sure that the terms haven't changed, right? And if there are any changes to these terms, then obviously this would be a red flag to the auditors, right? Because they would want to further investigate to make sure that these contract amendments are valid. Right? We could also have what is called a smart analytical procedure, right? So as many of you probably know, an analytical procedure first you need to develop your own benchmark for sales, right? You have to come up with your reported balance for sales, and then you compare it to the actual balance that's reported by the client. So we can program these analytical procedure as a smart analytical procedure. And then here we zoom in on the smart analytical procedure example from the previous slide to show you how it can be converted to smart contract audit logic, right? So we have the risk of material misstatement in sales. This is essentially the audit procedure that auditors need to perform for the sales account. This would be an audit objective, right? This audit objective is essentially audit logic that could be pre-programmed as a smart contract. Now, this smart contract can be loaded to the auditor's blockchain, and the auditors can send data to this smart contract to activate it. Right? Once auditors send data to this contract, then the smart contract will perform the test that it needs to perform, which would be to compare the sales benchmark to the actual sales transaction, right? Then once the results of the smart contract go through, then all these different users that we saw in the ecosystem slide for the auditor's blockchain, they would be able to see the results of these smart audit procedures, right? And we know that when we test full populations of data, we're going to get a large number of false positives, right? So if we get a large number of false positives, auditors could handle this problem two different ways. Well, they could manually look at each violation that the smart contract has triggered, and this is probably very efficient from a time perspective. So why not create a follow-up smart audit procedure that processes all the smart contract violations, right? change with smart contracts and blockchain. But this is not to say that audit judgment or that everything is going to go on the blockchain, right? Because audit judgment is not going to go away. The smart audit procedures can improve audit effectiveness and audit efficiency for those smart audit procedures that do not require audit judgment, unless we start to incorporate some IPA or some artificial intelligence into these smart contracts. But I don't think this is a possibility as of now. So here we want to describe that the future blockchain-based audit approach is going to consist of on the blockchain audit procedures as well as off the blockchain audit procedures. And when we talk about blockchain and smart contracts, it's interesting to think of all of the possibilities and all of the opportunities to really improve the way that this society works, essentially, right? Because we can apply this to other domains. But we also have to think about the challenges, right? We know that blockchain transactions, they do require more time to be processed than those transactions that are in a centralized or a private ledger, right? We also have to think about what would be the skill sets that future auditors and future accountants need, whether we are auditing the blockchain and smart contract system or whether we are auditing with blockchain and smart contracts. Confidentiality, this is another issue, right? What about employee payroll data, like social security numbers, right? Do we really want that kind of data on the blockchain? And then we talked about cybersecurity, right? If there's an error in the smart contract, and this is obviously a huge issue, right? Because we could have a lot of information losses this way. And private keys of digital wallets can be stolen every other day. I see some kind of cybersecurity breach on the blockchain related to private keys being stolen. So these risks are very real, and I don't think we know enough about blockchain yet to really be able to address this risk. But what I wanted to show really is that smart contracts on the blockchain, they provide a platform for continuous auditing as well as continuous audit reporting. So again, auditors were crazy about audit data analytics, now they're crazy about blockchain audits. But what if auditors could marry both and have audit data analytics on the blockchain? Okay. Questions?
My name is Omar. Good afternoon, guys. And our presentation is on voice recognition.
Omar, speak a little bit louder for me, okay?
Okay, so let's start with what is voice recognition? Voice recognition is a computer software program or hardware device with the ability to decode human voice. It also is a voice recognition that is commonly used to operate a device, perform commands, or whatever without having to use a keyboard, mouse, or pressing the buttons. It's usually done with automatic
So next time, I'm doing my part.
computer. So how does it work? So speech recognition software can analyze the sounds you make by filtering what you say, digitize it into a format that it can read and then analyze its meaning. Then based on the algorithms or previous input, it can make a highly accurate, educated guess as to what you're saying. So basically, you talk, let's say you pull out your phone, you talk to it, recognizes your voice, the words, and automatically types it to the cell phone. So how many of you guys actually use voice recognition? Yes. So do you know anybody who will actually benefit from this, or like the types of people?
I know. I have an uncle who's got early stages of Parkinson's, so if he's trying to type something, it's often feature.
That's a good example. My dad, he's like 55, 60, and he has a hard time reading. So instead of him like squinting his eyes, trying to like figure out what buttons to play, he told me to change it to voice recognition. It makes his life way easier.
So the first first voice recognition device was developed in 1952. It was called Aubrey. It was developed by Bell Laboratories, and pretty much they only recognized single digits, so spoken out loud. So like if you said 1, 2, that's only, it was like just an inputting. Like so it was able to just input numbers and stuff like that. Then later on in 1962, they developed a showbox, which pretty much was understood numbers and commands. So if you said 5 plus 3 plus 8 plus 6 plus 4 minus 9, and then said total, it will print out the correct answer, which is 17. If you guys don't believe that's the correct answer, you could do it. Then later on, Carnegie Mellon developed Harpy, which pretty much was a device that was able to comprehend over 1,000 words. It was also employed for a more efficient system for searching logical sentences. Later on, in 1987, they came out with Julie the doll, which pretty much was made for children, and she was programmed to train to respond to children's commands. So the problem with this was that you have to take a pause in between every command you said. So like, oh hi, you have to take a pause in order for the dog to recognize what you're saying to move on to the next word. Later, they developed the Dragon Dictate, which in 1990, the company Dragon developed the first voice recognition software for consumers. 7 years later, they improved it and developed Dragon Naturally Speaking, and you were able to speak 100 words per minute. And then,
so in 2001, Google invented the application Google Voice Speech, right? And then this application basically was used to censor the amount of data analysis to be able to match it up to the user query, but actually down to a human speech. Later on in 2010, Google introduced personalized recognition on Android devices, which allowed users to record different users' voice queries to develop an enhanced speech model. And basically had over like 230 billion English words, more than I can remember. So these are the different types of voice recognition today. We had Siri, we had Cortana, we have Alexa, and Google Home. So Siri is a virtual assistant developed by Apple. It is also for Apple products such as iOS, watchOS, tvOS, and macOS. It usually relies on cloud computing, which are cloud databases that stores a vast amount of words and phrases and uses lighting speech to understand what you mean with more precision. So I'm just gonna give us like a perfect example of how Siri can use.
so I don't know if you guys ever tried this, but if you click your iPhone and say, Siri, what's 0 divided by 0?
Imagine that you have 0 cookies and you split them evenly among 0 friends. How many cookies does each person get? See, it doesn't make sense. And Cookie Monster is sad that there are no cookies. You're sad that you have no friends.
And then also you go, tell me a story.
It was a dark and stormy night. No, that's not it.
No. Tell me a story.
It was a dark and stormy night. No, that's not it.
Well, usually, I don't know why, but usually she will go into saying like, you give a full like 3-paragraph story about Siri and how Siri came about. So it's pretty funny how like what you could say and
so tell Siri, I love you, and she said, everyone tells me that.
So I find it pretty cool how Apple developed that because it kind of makes it funny, makes it more enjoyable versus like when you have Alexa, Cortana, it's really not that engaging and stuff. So if you get bored, you can just talk to Siri. It's like having a friend. But according to Siri, I got 0 friends. Next, we just have like a quick video of just explaining like Siri.
This one's for Earth. This one is
works for Earth.
Bingo. Boom. Love that one. Felt it.
Yeah, felt good. Hey Siri, read my schedule.
You have 25 appointments at 7:15,
look.
7:20.
You're on the telly.
With so many projects in the works, it seems like Dwayne Johnson can't possibly take on any more.
Oh, that sounds like a challenge.
Hey, Dwayne, where are we going, buddy? Dwayne, buddy.
Hey Siri, show me my life goals list.
I found 10 reminders.
Thank you very much. Hey Siri, give me a Lyft ride to LAX.
Lyft can get you a lift in 60 seconds.
Mind if I drive? I know a shortcut.
You're...
Yeah. Hey Siri, what's the temperature in Rome today?
The high temperature for today in Rome will be 80 degrees, and the low will be 59 degrees.
So, do I pay you?
This is your new captain speaking. Looks like we have nice weather coming up for Rome, Italy. So sit back, relax.
This plane's going to Akron.
This way.
Right there. But yeah, pretty much that's what Siri can do. Siri, like, calendars, reminders, you can search the internet. So it's pretty much like having your own virtual assistant. So next we have Cortana. Cortana was developed by Microsoft. I don't know if anybody play like Halo, so you guys might recognize Cortana. But pretty much Cortana is the same thing as Siri, but only for Microsoft products such as Windows 10, Xbox One, and etc. She can set reminders, recognize natural voice without requirements of keyboard input, answer questions using information based off Bing engine search. Next we have Alexa.
So Alexa was created by Amazon, which most of us know. It is also a cloud-based voice service available on Amazon products such as Amazon Fire Stick, Echo, and etc. It is also capable of voice interaction, music playback, making to-do lists, setting alarms, like Nani said, streaming podcasts, and playing audiobooks, and providing weather, traffic, and much more. So Alexa can also control several smart devices using itself as a home automatic system.
Man, we just have this couple videos.
Okay, so we all know how voice recognition is really helpful for us, right? It makes our life easier and all that. So imagine now not having like Alexa.
In Austin, it's 60 degrees with a Alexa?
Amazon's Alexa lost her voice this morning.
Alexa lost her voice. How is that even possible?
We have the replacements ready, just say the word.
You're sure this is gonna work?
Yeah.
Alexa, show me a recipe for a grilled cheese sandwich.
Pathetic. You're 32 years of age and you don't know how to make a grilled cheese sandwich. Its name is the recipe.
Like how far is Mars?
How far is Mars? But how am I supposed to know? I've never been there. This guy want to go to Mars. For what? There's not even oxygen there.
Alexa, set the mood.
Now setting the mood. You're in the bush. And you're just and it's so spiky. Just hot in that bush.
Let's rebush, reboot.
No, like country music.
What's it called, Brandon?
I'm afraid Brandon is a little tied up. But do let me know if there's anything I can help you with. Jessica? Good boy.
Thanks, guys, but I'll take it from here. In Austin, it's 60.
Okay, and pretty much the next video is just gonna show you how Alexa kind of makes you feel like you're Iron Man, like you're Tony Stark, and you can just talk to your house and feel like you have Jarvis in there.
Alexa, how are you doing?
I'm answering the questions and learning more.
Alexa, turn on my command center.
Okay.
Dim command center to 5%.
Dim command center to 5%. Turn off my command center. Turn on inside entry lights. Trigger lock front door. Alexa, dim inside entry lights to 5%. Turn on dining room lights. Dim dining room lights to 5%. Trigger turn table lights red. Turn off dining room lights. Trigger turn dining room lights to blue.
Sorry, I don't see that in trigger.
Trigger turn table lights to blue. Trigger turn table lights to green. Trigger turn table lights to blue.
Stop me here just for like the sake of time. But you pretty much see how Alexa is pretty much has the whole thing of house automation, which is pretty cool. I don't know if anybody else wants to walk in the house, but like, hey Alexa, turn on the lights. Like, makes life much easier, especially if you have like a carrying groceries inside your house. If she can open the door for you, honestly, that's where technology is really now.
Before like, you guys think like this is something you guys would consider having at your home, or is it something like that will make you realize like, damn, you're gonna make it?
Does it take a lot to install it, or do you?
No, actually, in another video before, I was doing another video similar to this. It's just more of like they're plugging. It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys ever pay attention to your car, how it has those kind of chips into your car. It's kind of like programming one of those chips into like your breakers and stuff like that in order for her to control the house and stuff, the lights, like in your circuit breaker, so she can control the lights and stuff like that. It's just that simple. You're not like redesigning your whole house. You're just taking a chip and you're plugging it into it.
You know, I have in my office, I decided to do that. And so my office is this kind of old-fashioned house, and so I bought these devices that you put over there and you can do your cell phone control everything. It might cost $20 each. Doesn't like my voice very much. I like the market, I gave up. I tried to teach Mochi, but he wouldn't do it.
My cousin has Alexa at the house now, but the only issue is that Alexa's very sensitive, like extremely sensitive. So my cousin's name Alexa too. So it's a problem because they'll say her name in conversation, and all you hear is Alexa. Yeah, so it can literally fix up like whispers.
That's kind of like one of the downfalls, but we'll talk more later about the problems and everything with voice recognition. And now Omar's going to speak about Google Home.
So Google Home is a brand smart speaker developed by Google. It's insane. And it's also able to command and interact with services to Google's intelligent personal assistant called Google Assistant. And also there are a large number of services, both in-house and third-party, that are integrated around the user to listen to music, control playback, or videos or photos, or receive news updates entirely by voice, like Alexa and the rest of the voice recognition.
So next we just have like a little trailer video for like Google Home. Just fast forward.
Okay, Google, turn on the hall lights.
Okay, Google, turn up the music.
Okay, Google, what's a good substitute for cardamom?
Combine 1 part cinnamon and 1 part nutmeg.
Okay, Google, what sound does a whale make?
To baby's dream? How do you say nice to meet you in Spanish?
Me encantada de conocer. Okay, Google, dim the downstairs lights.
So pretty much Google Home is kind of like the same thing as Alexa, but it's made by Google. Does all the same similar functions as Alexa.
There are also problems with voice recognitions, such as filtering out background noise, privacy, and clearing up certain accents. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you how it's kind of like a mission.
Just before I go to the next slide, I don't know how you guys ever noticed you're walking outside and you're like, hey Siri, call mom. She's like, okay, calling Gerald. Because there's just so much noise like outside, so that's like one of the main problems is trying to figure out a way to filter out that background noise. And before we get into also with privacy, recently there was an issue with Samsung, one of their smart TVs that has recognition. When you're purchasing a TV, you're signing a contract saying that you're allowing Samsung to monitor your voice, your conversations, your actual conversations you're having, because with voice recognition, these devices, they're learning. They're always constantly learning, and they have to adapt to your way of speaking, because there's so many different ways you can pronounce different things. As you can see on the next slide, it's hard to tell with accents. So that was like one of the main issues with voice recognition is privacy. It's a big invasion. Some people feel like it's a big invasion of privacy just with that whole thing with Samsung. So here's a funny video I found. I hope you guys like it.
What's the buttons?
Oh no, they installed voice recognition technology in this lift. I heard about this.
Voice recognition technology? In a lift? In Scotland? You ever tried voice recognition technology?
No.
They don't do Scottish accents.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11.
11. 11.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11.
Whose idea was this? You need to try an American accent. 11. 11.
That sounds Irish, not American.
Doesn't it? 11.
Where in America is that? Dublin?
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
Try an English accent, right? 11. 11.
You for the same part of England as Dick Van Dyke?
Listen, using smarts.
Please speak slowly and clearly.
Smart ass.
11.
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
11. If you don't understand the lingo, away back home to your own country.
Ooh, is that talk now, is it? Way back to your own country?
Oh, don't start, Mr. Bleeding Heart. How can you be racist to a lift?
Please speak slowly and clearly.
11. 11. 11. 11.
You're just saying it the same way.
You keep saying it till I understand Scottish, alright? 11. 11. 11. 11.
I'll just take his head in as a cow.
This is a voice-activated elevator. Please state which floor you would like to go to in a clear and calm manner.
Calm. Calm. Where's that coming from? Why is it telling people to be calm?
Because they knew they'd be selling this to Scottish people who'd be going up for nuts at it.
You have not selected a floor.
We have 11.
If you would like to get out of the elevator without selecting a floor, simply say, "Open the doors, please."
Please. Please. Suck my wally. Please. I'm not begging that for nothing.
Open the doors, please.
Please. Pathetic.
Please remain calm.
What do you want to do? Get up there. Hey,
Just wait for it to speak.
You have not selected a floor.
Use your code. You don't answer these doors. I'm going to come to America. I'm going to find whatever desperate actress gives you a voice, and I'm going to go to electric chair for you. Scotland's your last stop. Scotland! Scotland!
Going up?
Yeah, so pretty much we can see the main problem with voice recognitions, because there's so many different ways to pronounce different words, and people say it different ways, especially English, like an English accent, and how we say things in America two different ways too. Even though it's English, it's said in two different ways. And I know with Spanish is like, you can say one word 5 different ways, and I know it's like that in many different languages. So that's the main problem with voice recognition, being able to trying to get a hold of all those different ways of saying it. As technology progresses, it gets better and better. That's probably why Miklos' voice recognition his home doesn't like him. Maybe it's because like he has accent, he's not understanding it. It's not able to understand it properly and stuff like that. So it's like maybe Mochi barks, he'll probably get it right. But yeah.
So what are some of the problems? One of the biggest issues is privacy. So how many of you guys think like when you talk, your phone records conversation and you automatically assume like, oh, I'm being targeted? A lot of you guys, right? Even me. So people are convinced that after using a conversation and being deliver ads, companies are listening to them through their phones and BUIs, and you all often feel targeted and unsafe. But in reality, these devices spend most of the time like in passive listening mode, meaning let's say you are having a conversation with one of your friends about a party or a vote. So your phone automatically targets the words vote or party, and then like because of that, like you start getting like ads and different things all over your phone and social media. So in reality, they're not listening to you. One of the biggest issues with Amazon is that they granted third-party app developers access to audio recordings that were saved by Alexa, and Google is now also giving developers access to the recordings as well.
So like another thing too, like how I mentioned before, voice recognition devices, they're here to learn. So by them listening to your conversations, learning things about you, because that's the best way they can actually predict what you're trying to say, is learning about you. So them listening to your conversation, it's like they're trying to predict what you're gonna say. So if you're saying, look up the nearest restaurants. So it's like, it takes a while for her to like Alexa and stuff like that to realize what you're saying. So it needs like all these different databases about you, all these cloud inputs just to understand what you're saying, because it takes a lot to go into voice recognition. And that's why it's been developing since 1952, where you're only able to say numbers now. Look where it got so far. So it's getting there, but it still needs a lot of improvement.
Another issue is wiretaps and hacking. So Amazon handed over echo data to law enforcement on the side investigation after we did research on it, and they neither confirmed nor denied that they wiretap devices. But another big issue is that hackers are able to access anything that is on the internet, ranging from voice control thermostats to smart speakers. But you would think like, why would they wiretap smart speakers? And the reason for it is because they want to listen to your conversations for some reason. And also, you can turn the mic into a wiretap, which is crazy if you ask me. And sometimes, like let's say you have your Mac and your camera's not on. Maybe like they hack into your computer and they turn the video on. Or same thing with your cell phone. Like they can tap into your voice recording and like start downloading all the data that is installed in your phone, similar to the speakers where they can have access to it.
So pretty much, how is it used in accounting? You'll play a little bit shortly. Honestly, what I think it's used in accounting, it just makes life a little easier, especially when it comes to the data inputs. Rather than inputting it yourself with the computer and stuff like that, you can just speak it out loud, and it will be able to process that information. So I think it will make it a little bit easier for us accounting, especially when it comes to audit and tax. I think it will be a little easier. Video.
Think of something fun. Did bookkeeping come to mind?
Control your head and get up and down below.
Didn't think so. I wish I could just talk to my phone and then it'd go right into my accounting. Introducing Talk, an artificial intelligence bookkeeping system. All you need is a phone and a scanner. Here's how it works. Say you're buying coffee for the meeting with Jeff. Once you've paid, Talk pings your phone to record your expense. Take a look at the notification, and then just talk about what you bought and why. This is a business meeting. I met with Jeff from Gray Fox to go over the new contract. Hey. Hey, Jeff. Talk then codes and sends the information right into your accounting process. Pretty cool, right? What about all the mail? Invoices, bills, checks, and all the other paper that comes into your office every day. Simply throw it on your scanner, and let Talk go to work.
But here's my favorite. My accountant's always chewing me out for not properly tracking business mileage. But now, you're on your way to a work-related event, just plug this little guy in and track how long you drove. All your miles are saved right here.
And here comes the
business dinner with Donovan James to go over the new proposal.
By coding all your transaction details in real time, you're completely prepared for an audit by the IRS. He's a great dude. And best of all, you have total control over your business. With the click of a button, Talk pulls up financial records, receivables, payables, employee expenses, and account balances 24/7. Now think of something fun. With Talk, now you have time to go do it.
So you can just see there how briefly how the voice recognition is starting to come into play when it comes to accounting. Obviously, probably 4 or 3 years from now, it's going to get a little more sophisticated, where you might not even need an app. It's just more simply just your laptop or computer, your desktop will be able to recognize your voice or your office. Like you might have an Alexa in your office now. So it's like, hey Alexa, pull out my financial statements, or read out my financial statements, or Alexa, input this number into my financial statements. So how cool would that be if you're an accountant and you're auditing or you're doing tax and you're just speaking rather than saying you're just doing it yourself? I think it would be a little more fun and a little more interactive. Future development of voice recognitions. I feel like, honestly, how cool you think if you just walk in your house and like put ice in my cup and it automatically does that. Like, I don't know, I always kind of want to look like Tony Stark and just have like that whole kind of thing. Like, I'm actually doing this project, I'm actually thinking of talking to my mom, like, hey mom, let's get an Alexa. Like, I think it's honestly cool, and I think it's like just going, how about just go in your car? Like, we have self-driving cars, so being able to talk to your car, like play music and stuff like that. Like, we already have Bluetooth devices but in the car, but it would probably be a little more sophisticated in the sense of actually controlling more functions than just reading out text messages and calling people. Here's a little video.
Imagine a day when your car, your home, and the outside world are seamlessly connected. When you can access information, entertainment, and more using only your voice. That day is coming with Dragon Drive.
Oh, almost forgot. Hotel reservations. Dragon, book me a room at the Parker Hotel in Chicago for tonight and tomorrow, and let me know when I'm confirmed. I'll bring back something cool for you. Sound good?
Awesome. Bye, Dad.
Good morning, Dragon.
Good morning, Mike. Your hotel reservation is confirmed, and your flight is on time. Terminal 1, Gate 3.
Great.
There's some heavy traffic on the way to the airport.
Find me a faster route. Is everyone on for the meeting tonight?
Yes. Your dinner with the client is at 8:30, and all 4 parties have accepted the invite.
Excellent. Now find me some new music. What's Steve listening to?
Steve Hill or Steve Murphy.
Hill. Perfect. Add that to my music. Find a parking spot near the terminal.
I found one. Turn left here. Turn right here.
Call Donna.
Hi, hon. Everything okay?
Yeah, even got a great spot. Hey, if you're still home, would you mind recording the game tonight?
I'm already on my way to school, but no problem. Have a great trip.
Thanks, bye.
Dragon, record the Knicks game tonight for Mike. Oh, and set the home security system too.
Sure thing, Donna. Excuse me, Donna. A vehicle indicator is showing the left tail light needs to be replaced. Would you like me to schedule an appointment?
Yes, find a garage with the lowest price for that service, and check my calendar.
I'll take care of it and set up a reminder.
Dragon, can you please send me the history of the Statue of Liberty?
No problem.
Tell me, what are those new buildings over there?
Those buildings are part of St. Charles Hospital, scheduled to open in December. Donna, you're almost out of milk and orange juice. There's a sale on those items that the Quick Mart will be passing in 5 minutes.
Thanks. Remind me on my way home. And add ice cream to the list. Please, Mom.
Should I add ice cream to your reminder?
Sure.
In your car, your home, and where.
So pretty much we can see how Dragon takes it to the next level when it comes to home automation. I mean, I think it's pretty cool if I can just talk to my car to find a parking spot. Especially I think you can all use that when the fall semester comes and parking gets crazy on campus. So I think that's pretty cool, and that's honestly where voice recognition is going now. And that's, I don't know how long it might take, but eventually it will get there, and then I hope all of you will try to use it. So pretty much Google, Amazon, Apple, and other businesses use voice recognition. It's used on cell phones, speakers, and other wireless devices. Google has reduced its speech recognition error by 30%, which I think is pretty good, since they first started developing it in 2001. Both Google and Amazon jumped into the market now for accounting for the 2 largest market shares in the industry. Value of virtual assistant market and speech recognition is a necessity and expected to exceed by $3 billion by 2020. And that is all.
Okay, so I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the one thing that will be difficult to get covered in exam or etc. I want to talk about this idea of continuous monitoring, continuous auditing. And before I start into this, I'll tell you just a little bit of the history of this. The CPAS project at Bell Labs was done from 85 to 90. Okay, and the first article on continuous auditing was published in 91. In 99, the AICPA published the book, the Red Book on Continuous Auditing. In 2003, IIA, the Institute of Internal Audit, published GTAG number 3, and then more recently GTAG number 16, and finally ISAC, the Institute of Internal Auditors, in 2010 published their guidelines. And that's now totally fideless because we rewrote the continuous auditing Red Book into what we call the Pink Book. And maybe I'll send you the Pink Book. Can you remember to just remind me? You already sent them the Pink Book? Send it to them. And that Pink Book is really like a collection of articles around continuous auditing, like one article is a survey of what the firms are doing, which is basically nothing. They are not using it in external audits, but they are, 2 of them have consulting practices for internal audit on continuous auditing. And my perception in the last couple of years is that has been a major increase on internal audit usage of some form of continuous audit. And these two practices, at least one of them is very profitable for PwC. So that's basically the status. I think that blockchain is going to create a possibility for a different animal on continuous auditing, because when those blocks close, it's a right moment in time to extract data. And so I think that there'll be a whole set of developments around this. And I don't think, when we did this, for example, at Unibanco, they ran in a daily cycle, their continuous audit. And they had a group of 3-4 people looking at the exceptions and following up. And I think that kind of thing is going to continue to happen. They'll need a group to monitor the outcome. And this is not like an audit once a year or twice a year, etc. This will be a continued type of thing. What I see in practice these days is that they call it continuous auditing, but the methodology is very, very similar to the traditional audit. You just repeat it many times, like once a month or once every 2 weeks, and etc. Which is not what we anticipated as continuous audit, but eventually it might be what's going to be happening. And the other thing, and I'm going to go into more detail on this, is what is this whole story around it? And it's really basically the idea of monitoring transactions or monitoring economic events, and then using that monitoring for a continuous audit, meaning to assure that events should be happening. And I always talk about a very simple model, and the model is a comparison between these are what's happening in the firm, you take a measurement, and then you compare it against a model, a standard. And the difference between the two is the variance. And this variance is very big, you create an alert. And you can adopt this kind of model many different ways. I actually like maybe better like this. Measurement, model, calculate the difference, create an alert. And this is very primitive, and that's basically what the continuous auditing type of story is. And we do that in data, we do that in controls, we do that in risk. And I'll come back to that a little bit. But the basic model of continuous monitoring, continuous auditing is comparing a measurement out of the system with a standard and see if there is a variance. Now you can do that once a month, once a year, once a second, once a millisecond. Depends what your capabilities are, but much more than that depends also what you need. And then the second interesting or following question to this is, what is this? Is this a real audit, or this is a control, or this is a meta control? And I'll let someone else do the theory about that. I haven't resolved that question. But I think that if we have a very, very complete continuous measurement, continuous assurance thing, you are going to have really a system of controls and a system of controls of the controls. And that system of control is going to have data exceptions that is going to deal with this. And I would, never underestimate how long it takes certain things to happen. But I would think that within your careers, you're going to find a lot of systems that are very self-monitoring. And I think you're going to find this kind of exception reporting thing becoming more and more intelligent, meaning more and more rules that help to detect problems. And the other thing that I think will be very interesting, and I'll tell you the end of the story before I tell you the beginning, the other thing will be very, very interesting is, will it be possible, all of the ones that I've seen up to today, and these days I see quite a lot of them, are really kind of handcrafted. What does it mean? You build for your own company. I would expect it to make a lot of sense that mounted on top of their system, and when they sell the system, they sell that as a separate model. I have never seen anything like that. And we tried a couple of times to create a project with a smaller vendor, and we never got it. We are exactly at this moment trying to do that with the ERP vendor in Brazil. Let's see if that's going to work. Because that would be the natural thing. Why you have to design a continuous audit system? You buy it with your system and it works for you. Certainly with the smaller firms, they don't have the competency even to design this. And the consulting engagements are very expensive. However, remember what we talked about, the fixed cost and variable cost. Once a piece of software is developed, the incremental cost is low. In this case, you have to monitor transactions, so the incremental cost might be larger. So that's kind of the bottom of the story. Let's just kind of look at a few of So, what we are today is at this stage whereby we issue opinions on the reports. And you haven't taken an audit, so it's maybe even easier for you to think. What you get is someone publishes their financial statements, balance sheet, income statement, some footnotes, okay? And the auditor goes have a look at that and says, this is fairly representative. I mean, there's not a lot of big errors on there. That's based on reports. Okay. Now, the other thing you could do is look at each different process and give assurance on top of the process, not the report, the process itself. And you could go into the data level assurance, and actually there is a committee of the ICPA doing data level assurance, but they haven't gone to the level of detail that we expected eventually to go. And I think this part, I have been talking about this for 20 years, might be quite different now with the kind of technology we have today. Things might look very different. So let's kind of leave this in peace for a little while. I'm going to make a couple of comments at the end of it. Okay, and so first there is this kind of facilitating technology story here. And what is the facilitating technology? Is progressively you start getting more and more things digitized, meaning data, as opposed to things on paper and et cetera, et cetera. And in this period of 86 to 90, we created this methodology at Bell Laboratories to monitor their billing system. And why Bell Labs and why that was the first? Because Bell Labs had this big telephone system to play with. And this big telephone system was one of the first things that were pretty much fully digitized in the collection of data. And was getting, in key days, something like 250 million transactions a day. So this whole thing of big data is not a new thing, correct? When I joined the labs in '85, it was already getting those volumes. But at that time, the technology was very different and dealt with that very differently. They picked up, there were 150 switches around the switches like a computer, and basically I call her, Taylor, and so I pick up my phone, used to go to an operator, the operator connected to her. And then they created these automatic devices that moved the arms, and at the end became all transistorized, and that was the switch. And the United States had about 142 of these things distributed in the United States. And I already mentioned this because I mentioned this when we were talking about why the internet was created. And the internet was created because, or at least that was the motivation of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Agency. The motivation was that if you threw an atomic bomb carefully in the outskirts of DC, you would basically get rid of the entire hub, and the US would lose its entire communication network. So they wanted a communication network that internetworked. So if you lost a big link, the whole thing still talked to each other. And so that was the idea of linking these things like ARPANET and BitNet together in a way to sustain communications. So the telephone system had this whole set of things around the United States with all the switches. Let's see this. With all the switches. And AT&T went private. AT&T divested of, oh, you can't see the green, okay? AT&T divested of its operating companies, so 7 new companies showed up, and they owned the switches. So AT&T didn't have access to the switches. So AT&T needed a mechanism to talk to their clients. So they created a billing system that went directly to the clients. Other interesting thing that generated this story is that there was a myth within AT&T, there was a story within AT&T that about 30% of the telephone calls were never billed. And after we did the study for a couple of years, we came down to the number like 1 or 2% were never billed. And one of the reasons to never bill was that there are contracts with the CIA and the FBI that they could not measure their calls. And so they were being paid in bulk. And the second thing that were never was the blue boxes. Have you ever heard of the blue box? You go to a payphone, and when you want to make a phone call, you drop coins into it. It goes blink, blink, blink. And it's a different blink for a quarter, for a dime, for a nickel. And people developed these blue boxes that did blink, blink, blink. And so it misled the telephone to thinking that you're dropping coins. Okay, that's a blue box. Okay, and those two things explain the large part. So at the end, there was not really a lot of things not being built. But the billing system was very vulnerable, very large and complicated. And the way they did, they went to the switches and they had a magnetic tape. And the switches collected information about phone calls. And at a certain moment, they stopped, downloaded it from magnetic tape, and went back to collecting phone calls. And one sacred thing at AT&T, no one touched the switches. There are 2 computers side by side, little computers for our image, very little today, and you could not touch them because they didn't want any interference with the system. It was very expensive. So when we did this thing, we had to basically work out of those tapes. And today you don't need tapes, they just route the billing. And by the way, the billing is disappearing because most long-distance telephone calling is getting part of the internet type of things and not costing anything. There's a book by a woman called Frances Cancross talking about the depth of distance. And the depth of distance means there is no long-distance charges. You want to hear something funny? Not so funny for me. I pay, when I'm in Europe or in other places, $10 a day to have full internet service. Okay, so I use that. And I fly back from Italy, I get this message, already used $100 today on phone calls. And what happened is that I left my cell phone on in the plane, just forgot to put it in my pocket. Okay, and they connected with Boingo for some reason, got me access, and started charging me for downloading mail and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm having a big fight with AT&T about reversing the charge. They don't want to do it. So I'm going to close my account. I have been thinking about that, so I'm giving up on my old job and starting with T-Mobile, which has a better plan for people like me. But it's pretty nasty when you sit on an airplane and finish up with, I don't know how many hundreds of dollars. It's more than $100, and they wouldn't tell me. Yeah. So don't forget, when you go on the airplane, what do? You put your phone in So with the development of technology, actually things got digitized. And you start doing a lot of sensing or sensoring, however you want to call it, which is basically using Internet of Things, type of things to collect information. ERPs collect a lot of information, and e-commerce collects a lot of information. So what we did there is we created this whole idea of a layer of monitoring, a layer of assurance on top of it. And that was the continuous audit idea, the books that we published, except in the beginning. Somewhere in, I think it was 2002, 2003, actually he's going to be your professor, Audit Mellon, called me up, and he was at Siemens at that time, head of IT audit at Siemens. And he said, I'm doing this thesis on Canadian University, doctor dissertation. We want to work on something to deal with the fact that we have these 200 ERP instances, meaning we use SAP. Siemens, one of the largest, maybe the largest German company. SAP, a large German company. So we use a lot of instances of SAP for all our businesses. But we only audit them once every 18 months or 24 months. So what can we do about it? And so we kind of worked for a while on this, and finally came up with this concept, which we call CCM, Continuous Control Monitoring. And basically, you have an ERP. Okay, I'm going to design ERP, which is a relational database, with applications around it. And they have controls built on it. And so what we basically did, we collected all the profile of controls that we were doing today and compared it with the standard. Exactly what we're talking about here. Comparing what's happening with data, in this case what's happening in controls, with what the controls should be. And every time we found something that was out of the norm, created an alert. So it's pretty straightforward type of thing. Siemens actually wrote the screening of the controls and the standard. And so we just created this comparison and etc. This methodology was created. The methodology actually at the end, both ACL and Caseware created their own product around that. And they sold it as a product. They got patents on it. We don't patent things here. And so kind of CCM is known for that. But what happened with us is that now we call continuous auditing is these two things together. And so we had a little nomenclature difficulty, and so the first one we came continuous data audit. So you're comparing data with data standards, and control monitoring, whereby you monitor control. So these two things became continuous audit. About a few years ago, we started adding this third one into it, which we call CRMA, continuous monitoring, risk monitoring assessment. Actually, easy to remember. Think about comma without the A. Okay, CRMA. And basically the idea of this is to come up with schemata of risk. And we divided the risk into three pieces. Okay. Operational risk, black swans, operational risk, I try to remember like two appears. Let's call it microeconomic risk. And black swan. So operational risk you picked up out of the ERPs of the company. Microeconomic risk is change in the market conditions. And black swan is something totally out of the probabilities of happening, but could be destructive. Like, for example, an earthquake that floods my nuclear plants. So those were the kind of three things. And then our next question was, how do we deal with changes in risk? And basically we started using this thing called KRIs, key risk indicators. You know, I don't know if you remember this term, KPI, key performance indicators. And this is used all over business. And now we created this idea of key risk indicators. And the key risk indicators were developed for operational risk, for macroeconomic risk, and for black swans. And the generic idea behind this was that if the risk changed somewhat, we would change the parameters on our continuous audit. So if the risk of, for example, raw materials changed dramatically, I mean, there was a big change on price of oil, for example, which happened very much, certain things became much more important on the audit and would rethink the program of audit. So this actually had the three elements of these: changes in data, changes in control, and changes on the profile of risk. Because when you create an audit program, you actually think what is the risk of your corporation. And you are going to risk the important thing, examine the important thing, leave the little ones away. And so this was the idea. And we actually had a dissertation, Naeem Moon's dissertation, whereby he used just an example on blacks, or on key risk indicator, but what he was using as a proxy to measure KRIs was social media. And so he had a dog food company that actually had press news that they killed some dogs, the food killed some dogs. And so by measuring that, he had a couple of other instances of that sort, and he saw like the risk going up and the risk going down, and he kind of measured that and say, what are the audit implications? And we are waiting for other dissertations to work on this area. And now we call continuous auditing three things: continuous data audit, plus continuous control monitoring, plus CRMA. And it's always the same kind of thing. There is a layer of monitoring, continuous audit on top of it. I'll tell you a little story about AT&T. I might even have the slides here. We were doing this project at AT&T, was a continuous data audit project, and we had these levels of alerts here. We had like 4 levels of alerts: something that's just a measurement problem, something that's a problem to communicate with the external auditors, and something that you need to stop the system because you have a catastrophe in your hands. And we actually had a catastrophe in our hands. We were experimenting with actually just one state of the United States. And one night, I get a call from one of the guys working with me, Kazuezawa, and he said, we have a real problem here in the billing. And the billing was coming out all wrong. Our standard for billing completion was like 98%, and they went to 60%, they went to 40%. So it was a catastrophe going on. So we actually stopped the process. We required the process to stop until we found out what was going on. And it turned out that some guy had mounted a magnetic tape, put the data into the biller, and then mounted the same tape again. So the bill started coming out twice. And then the guy thought he was a programmer and multiplied every field by -1 and mounted it again. So he finished up with negative account numbers. The total catastrophe happened. Because the system caught it, the bill, none of the bills went out. Okay, they stopped at the printers.
But the next morning I get a call from our people, and I said, our data feed stopped. No one's sending us data. And turned out that the operation guys were very angry at the whole thing, that we stopped their system. They didn't know what was happening, and they stopped it. So a big corporate kind of thing. I was very lucky because the reason I went, at the moment I went to the labs, the guy who was CFO of AT&T was an ex-partner of Coopers & Lybrand, a guy called Bob Kavner, and Bob was a friend of mine since my early days at USC. And when I got to AT&T, he said, go and have a look at the internal and see what they're doing. That's how I started doing all this stuff. And so I called him up, and in about half an hour, my data was flowing again. And then I get this very stern call from the operation guy saying, we want to talk to you, and I knew they were going to meet me up. And so I went with my biggest guys, we had to talk to them. And they were pretty upset with us when we saw the system, but when we showed them the reports that we had and show what had happened, they said, oh wow, how do you know this? And I showed the reports, and they said, but how do you know this? I said, because we measured this, we had these things we are doing. And our approach at that time was an interesting approach. This was the RCAM system, and that's a residential billing system, the residential customer account management system. And it was the biggest investment software AT&T had. They invested something $1.2 billion on this thing because it's a take-back strategy. Basically, pick up the billing back. It was a big thing for them, justifiably so. And so they had this thing kind of going on, billing, et cetera, et cetera. And the measurements that they were doing, all on tape, organized, et cetera, et cetera. But they really didn't know exactly what was happening in there. And they had something like 5,000 change requests in place. So we couldn't quite go and ask changes to the system to put our biller in. So what we did is a screen scraping technology. Today it was common, at that time was not so common. And so what we did, we picked up reports, and we looked what was writing the report to the computer program, used text mining, which you heard about here, etc. And pick up report ABC, look what the word next to, what's the number next to total, and picked up the number. So that's the way we did this thing. And we did this for hundreds of reports, started with 2 or 3, keep increasing. And so we had these reports analyzing the situation systemically that operations didn't have. So this was actually the fastest project I ever sold. Okay, and then they started very angry. At the end, they were quite interested, and they said, we want this too. Okay, so it was a 5 MPS project. The MPS, a member of technical staff, is $200,000 fully loaded at that time. Now it's much more. But now they don't do that very much. And so we had $1 million project sold in a day. And at that time, my big difficulty was convincing the auditors that it was okay to give them the report that we were preparing for the audit. So we had a lot of discussions about that, but it wasn't too difficult. And we basically said, you know, 70% of the stuff you do here is good for operations, good for you, but about 30% is only yours. Operations want the local stuff, they don't want the systemic stuff. Okay, so we finished up compromising what would be given to them. And we created a thing we called the Prometheus system. So we had a CPAS system, continuous process audit system, and the Prometheus system in parallel. And Prometheus was designed for this, for continuous monitoring. And CPAS was for continuous auditing, but they both, because you need to monitor to pick up the data that you do. So that was the story, and at that time I didn't kind of see the whole picture, I just did the system for Prometheus. Interestingly enough, just before I must have left the labs for about 5 years ago, a little bit before I left the labs, I went to visit the billing organization, I can't remember why, and I found the system still there. And they actually had re-platformed it into Windows, and it was Prometheus, wasn't CPAS. But was still the same variable names, except I don't think anyone could really knew how to program it, so they just re-platformed it and didn't reprogram it. But it was still there at that time, so I had a long resiliency. And then I started seeing this whole discussion about continuous auditing versus continuous monitoring, and it's kind of a boring discussion in my opinion. It's, you know, monitoring is done by management, auditing is done by auditors. And they look at some same things, some different things. Auditors at the end, certainly the external ones, look at fairly representation. They're not interested of everything being right. They're interested on the overall story being materially correct. Even the external auditors don't want to look at minutiae unless they want to write audit comments. So that was kind of the difference that we found among the systems. And this is older, 2 or 3 years old, and these were some of the analytic methods that we have developed here at the Car Lab around continuous auditing. And this thing, continuity equations, is actually a set of formulas that link the stages of the business processes. And this is the paper I mentioned earlier to you that took us 10 years and 7 months to publish. And we, basically I was working with this guy, Andy Sherman, he is actually a physicist. And we were trying to kind of understand how the billing works, and I'm going to show you a slide of this, trying to understand how it works. And I wanted to create some formulas that link, this has so many events, this one has so many, what is the percentage, to see if there was a big fallout and etc. And when we did that, Andy said, oh, we do this in physics all the time. This is called continuity equations. I had no idea what they do in physics. So we called it continuity equations. And then we did it and worked okay. And then the first project we did at Car Lab was a project for a big health company in HCA in the south of the United States. And we did continuity equations there, Professor Kogan and myself. At that time, we were the only 2 of us around. They had a couple of PhD students working with us. Actually, Pooja Wu was one of our early PhD students. That was his dissertation. And I say poor because it took 10 years to publish this paper. Okay? And this is a very interesting story because we submitted the best journal accounting, got rejected, and we got comments like, you don't know what continuous auditing is, because they were afraid to know who we were. So it's kind of really nonsensical reviews. This is what happens when you come up with a very new technology to establish journals, they don't want to publish it. Violates them. And so it's difficulty that I had all my career, is that the stuff we do, the leading edge. And so I had a very stubborn co-author, Professor Kogan, and I said, let's cut this paper into 2 papers, will be published. Now we have to stay that way. And that's why I got rejected twice in the accounting review, twice in the audit journal, then got into the audit journal. Because I had a big fight with them and they finally got it in. Okay. But took 10 years of Pooja had graduated, went to University of Massachusetts, and did have a publication out of this thing. He finished up being full professor and chairman of the department there, but no, wasn't new to this. It took a long time for this to be published. And we still don't have a lot of applications of that. Okay, clustering is very popular these days. Process mining is getting very popular. This stuff we are still kind of developing. But they are all part of kind of the ecosystem of continuous audit. Now this is very old. I could update it under time. I never bothered with this. This is like the 3 elements, and some companies that we worked or we tried to work. And Abby, who has been here for a year, will not recognize half of these names because we don't work with them anymore. We finish our project, but we do something else. Okay, there'll be a lot of new names in this thing. But some of them we kind of already done it. Why are we going to do it again? So we we don't do it. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about the CPAS project, because the CPAS project is a good thing to talk about, to understand the concept. So we have these kind of 5 basic concepts. One, it's a matrix. What is a matrix? Is a measurement of the system. This were a matrix. Okay, so if you take a parameter out of an ERP, out of SAP or etc., like I'm measuring the number of transactions, that's a matrix. Okay, the second thing is an analytics, and a lot of the analytics that we had there were not formulas, but they were graphics. And the graphics will represent a formula, etc. Then the third one was standards, and we use the word standard, but you would call it, I guess standards is good. Is good. And what is this thing that you compare, the module or the standard? You compare what actually happened with what should happen. Sometimes what should happen, you don't know it very well. And when we started doing the RCAM, they had books this size describing when the system was designed, what would be the volumes and what would be the measurements, etc. But when you went and used the software, or you went and captured the data, it didn't look like that at all. So actually, Kazuo and Fern, my quarter, invented a lot of the standards. And what happened after we used it, they get violated very much, and we didn't think there was a big violation. You change the standard, and you are happy with something that's really monitored. You know, it sounds like cooking. Try a little bit more salt, a little bit less of salt, and that's what it was. And it was, you know, you learn it while you're doing. I always tell my PhD students, if you know what you're doing, you're not doing research. Okay, the good research is the one that can learn and devise solutions while he's doing. The moment you start repeating what you did before without improvement, you are doing consulting, not research. And so, and actually the companies we work with get a little bit disturbed when I say we don't know what we're doing. Yeah, hire me and why they know what they're doing. How come if you hire you guys, you don't know what you're doing? And I say, if you know you're doing, it's not an interesting problem. That's for a consultant to do. And so that's typically. Now the alert basically required you to define what's a substantial error. Okay, so we need to have really 2 standards. A standard of what this thing should be, and a standard of what is the maximal allowable error. And it has to be an absolute value, because it could be too big or too small. And so that was allowed. And then this 4th one you're not going to understand very well, is because at that time, we couldn't go into the database, pick up the data, because too many changes in the system would take forever. So what we actually did is picked up reports, scanned the reports, picked the thing out. Okay, today we call that screen scraping. At the time was report scraping that we are doing, and we call that measurement. Monitoring would be if we would be digging into the database, picking up the data. 4 years later, when the system was up and working all over and etc., typical Bell Labs, you do a post-mortem. And what is a post-mortem? People from other areas of Bell Labs came, some senior scientists, etc., and evaluated what you did. You pass over the application, you pass it to billing and to internal audit, and they think if you did a good job or not. And they liked it pretty much. But they creamed me because of this measure. They said you should go direct to databases, this and that, and etc. Which actually, the total review of the project was very positive, but they didn't like that. By the time I left Bell Labs, there were 50 applications doing measure. Because going into the databases is very intrusive. And I see this everywhere. They are continuous auditing. They don't like auditors to be interfering with operating systems. They make copies, they do this, they avoid people fiddling with operating systems because it might create a lot of problems. With several of our applications, we basically extract a little bit from the system, and use that to measure things. And then if some problem is happening, then you download everything, because you don't want to interfere in the day-to-day, night-to-night operation of the system, because you might create some algorithm that is computational rich and you stop the system because you make them do cycles. So you don't want to be mainstream if you are an auditor. So the idea of measurement versus monitoring was pull the data out, that's measurement, and then analyze it, as opposed to monitoring it every moment. And we had actually the optimal moment to do this was at the end of the transaction cycle when the bill were issued. Okay, and this is what I wrote in that first paper, the 91 paper. This, oops, hold on. Sorry, I put the alt in, so I'll go home. So we said at that time, the methodology will change the nature of evidence, will change the timing, instead of being once a year or whatever, will be frequent and based on the pulse of the application. What you would do in the audit will change, and the most interesting concept is the concept of audit by exception. Instead of a program of auditing, you will be looking at alerts and actionate a more detailed audit when big alerts happen. And you start now hearing in the literature about audit by exception, but that's about it. The others haven't quite got it. But the idea of what they call continuous auditing now is quite popular. And you're going to see it when you go into the firms and you start talking with them. And this is the idea of a continuity equation that I was talking earlier to you. We used to pick up the magnetic tapes. The magnetic tapes split up into data sets. The data sets, each one of the calls splitting up into call details. And then they go to billing, and the billing was monthly. And there are not as many bills as days of billing cycles as days of month. There are 20 of them. So the natural place to pick up these bills and analyze them was the close of the billing cycle. Because if you do it in the middle, you have to project how many transactions there is not real. So that's how I learned, and that's how we wrote in our monographs. We have several of them. Is continuous auditing depends on the pulse of the application. Some applications are monthly, some applications like the billing cycle, like this part of billing. Some are daily in the bank, in the Itau-Bank, or in that case, Itau-Unibanco Bank. Banks process everything at night. So the natural moment to pick it up is the end of the day. Okay. And there are certain things that you want to avoid big exceptions, so you do it real time. You know, just after the thing happens, you stop. The other interesting thing about this is that most corporate systems have upstreams, the system, and downstreams. So if you collect the bill gets processed, then you do electronic transfer to the client, whatever. And real-time monitoring actually would allow you to stop a transaction because before it goes downstream. And it depends, it happens daily, monthly, etc. But very nice thing that is close to continuous monitoring is just not letting it go further. So you don't get a lot of errors creating a mechanism. Now, this is the story that I have told in many articles and etc. But things are changing. And what's actually happening now is that progressively everything in the world is going to become digital. Everything is going to become digital. And so there is going to be all these feeds from outside into your systems. And you need a data standard that will coordinate it. And they are eventually give you feedback loops on these things. So everything in life is going to be progressively more and more synchronized and automated. And there'll be different billing processes, collection processes, supply processes, and etc. And they'll go to the client, the orders will come back, and etc., etc. And there'll be very little manual interference. And that's why I say, you know, the automated functions of the auditor going in there and repeating the same thing 1,000,000 times or 1,000 times, is going to progressively disappear. But the distance between the manager or the user and the system is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Piggybacking of applications, and then also goes blah, 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 blah. And the role of the auditor, hopefully, is going to be a role of understanding the levels, understanding the risks, and taking care of the exceptions for management. Now, if we goof off and don't deal with the auditing standards and don't deal with cybersecurity and et cetera, there'll be other professions that will come in and steal it, start making money on it. And so that's why I think it's so important today that the profession re-establishes that standard. If you knew me, you would better, you would know that last thing I want to do is do standards. Okay, but I spend a lot of my time today talking to standard setters and etc. because I think you need to kind of liberalize the rules and make the rules digital. So the profession will expand in the way it should expand. The role of the auditor has to change into a digital auditor. And if I say one thing to you guys is you have to constantly update yourself technically. Okay? And it doesn't mean you have to be an expert in clustering or something like that, but you need to know clustering exists and you can do A, B, C. And if you have to be a little bit better, you should be able to interpret an output of a clustering algorithm. And I call this lifetime learning. And I say, you know, if you get too busy in the firm or in your career and don't study and don't update yourself, there'll be a moment that you stop and you can't do anything else. And this, although I kind of have done this 30 years ago, this is getting faster and faster and faster. Meaning, things I taught in class 20 years ago, you couldn't even go to a recruiter and talk about it. Now you can. Now you mention XBRL, they heard of it. You mention blockchain, they heard a lot about it. And it's getting more and more. Audit data standard, they haven't heard yet. They will. But this is kind of a closing cycle. And this is the continuity equations that that particular paper dealt with, and I think eventually they are going to be more important. And I applied this into airlines. And I really wanted to work desperately with airlines, because airlines have this thing here, the reservation database. And these are huge databases, and everything out of the airline is based on that thing. Okay, crew scheduling, okay, airplane maintenance, everything comes out of reservations. Capacity of planes and things. So it was, because that would be perfect continuity equation. So I got an airline to agree to do that, and then I discovered they had 6 planes. So I gave up on that airline. About a year ago I flew on that, they now have 50 planes. Okay, but now the guys are not there anymore. I have to start from the beginning. But airlines were perfect for this kind of stuff. Well, very much like AT&T in one sense, but they didn't have the volumes that AT&T had. Okay, and this is actually the architecture of the CPAS system, continuous process auditing system. So they had 5 big data centers around the United States. And these data centers brought the tapes, come in, they collected it, they ran this cycle here, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we did, we picked up the reports that operated the entire network. At that time, they had this kind of, they called them RGE station, remote job entries, and they were basically a card reader and a printer, and they were distributed around the different switches and around where the AT&T operated. And they gave managers reports of how they were doing for managing. So what we picked up those electronic reports, scanned it, scraped the data we needed out of it, and put it on a relational database. And throughout the report, not really. The auditors that we are working with said, absolutely don't throw them up, save them for us. They wanted everything saved, so we saved them. Big deal, saving electronic reports. And then we generated an interface to this database, to this relational database. This is like Oracle, etc. was a different database at that time. At Bell Labs, we had this principle, we developed everything. Okay, we didn't use commercial products, but I stuck to my guns and used a commercial product because there was too much problem to develop an RGE station. If you look at this thing here, this is 20 years ago, more than 30 years ago. We actually used the same kind of technology used today on the internet, hypertext. And we didn't invent it, we found it somewhere and wrote code for it. And basically, this is a layout of the billing system. You will click on this, you will go one level low. You will click on that one, you go level low. Now very, very familiar to you. At that time, not so familiar, but we chose the right technologies to do this. And so this is the way we designed it. On top of that, we had the reports. We have the detailed reports we call analytics, and they have different measurements. And we put that all together on a system interface that looked like this. Okay, this is not the exact picture of the system interface. It's a copy because I didn't have access to the system when I was writing this thing, and I had someone draw it out with a graphic thing. But this is pretty representative. We have pictures of how the screen looked like. And this part here is something you are not very used to see. This is actually a map. If you click on this, you go there and etc. And you put there's a little icon like a little globe, and you press on that and you got this. This was pretty cool that one of the guys that was computer scientists worked with us. And this whole story about it, this is the cycle. And these were the number of transactions going to this. And this little example says, well, 998 went to billing. Okay, only 988 came out, so we lost 10 of them. Gave me an alarm. And we had a pile of these things of different types, on different reports and etc. And at the beginning, we looked at these things and kept developing them. After a while, operations were looking at most of these things. And these days, there are modern systems that do some of this stuff. But this is actually the story when I was telling you that we generated Prometheus. This is actually a graph. And our completion standards were 98%. And you see things hover around the 98%. And look what happened with this. I mean, this is real big. It just fell. Because the filter stopped these duplicates and etc. And we said, we had a catastrophe. We stopped it here. Okay, and then progressively it went back when we reinstated the system. And just one comment I usually make, this is actually a graphic analytics. It was analytics, but we put in the form of graphic to make easier to interpret. Now, is there another question?
Oh, no, I was just scratching.
Just scratching, okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was it your job to find out what happened with those 10 reports that were lost?
No, operations job.
Okay.
But auditors will look at that and see if there's something that they need to examine more. And what you ask here, Brian, is one of the basic things that you need to kind of wonder. is what are the roles? How do the roles change? And in several of these organizations now that say that they have continuous auditing, the first thing I look is say, do you have a group dedicated to examine what exceptions are, either in auditing or in operations? But that's kind of a symptom that you are doing reasonable continuous auditing, continuous monitoring. If you don't have a group, what's the purpose? Correct? Someone needs to follow these things up. Okay, and actually this is the same report as this, but showing that reports can be shown in different ways. And this one, you basically finish up eliminating weekends. You didn't do anything, so you eliminated the weekends, and then put it in bar form, and then we could see much better what was happening. An interesting thing that happened is that we documented things very nicely. And this is like a documentation of it. And turns out that they started using the CPAS system for training because the documentation was so good that you could just click and understand what the thing was. Okay, so this is the basic CPAS effort, first of its kind, etc., etc. And then, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to stop pretty soon. Just kind of telling you a couple of the studies that we've done. This is the first study that we did for the CALA. The CALA was founded around this thing here. I went and spent, believe it or not, I spent my sabbatical at KPMG here in Montreal, 97, 98. And spent 6 months, was a half sabbatical, working there, designing application, continuous auditing system.
I thought sabbatical meant you took a break from it.
No, sabbatical means that you stop teaching and you do other things. In my case, I always do. I take sabbatical. You guys were lucky or unlucky, got me, and for a year I'm out. Okay, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm just writing papers. That's what you do. But so that's what I did. I went, and the rules is that if you're doing research, okay, if you're doing research, they'll pay you 80% of your salary, and those 20% they use to hire an adjunct. That's what they typically do. And you have to submit a plan, what you're going to do, and it has to be research. Okay, so, you can't do it. So that's what the sabbatical is. So I took sabbatical in KPMG to work on continuous auditing, designed a plan. The day I stepped out, they canceled the project. Okay, I was furious. And so the poor guy, that was sponsoring me over there, had the bad luck of 2 weeks later being on an airplane flight to me, sitting next to me. So I really moaned. And he said, okay, Nicholas, don't get upset. We canceled this because you are going to piss off a client. And meaning how many companies I work here, I don't think I get them very angry. I get along very well with companies we work with. But that's what they were. They're afraid to lose a client. Okay? But if you find a client, you find a person to do this continuous auditing project, we'll fund you. Okay? So I said, great, and started looking for a company to work with. No luck, no one wanted to give me data. And I actually finished up buying a .com that had went down. Kind of buying. So I said, okay, now I have data, I can do this. And I was going to go to KPMG. But Judge vetoed giving me the data. So that went to zero again. And one day, totally out of the blue sky, these guys called me up. And the HCA. And HCA is one of the largest companies in the United States. They hold like 200 hospitals in the south of the United States. I don't know if they still do that, they used to. And about 200 medical centers. They even have one in Paris, or et cetera, et cetera. And they said, we have a problem. We have a deferred prosecution agreement. You know what that means? Is someone did something bad. Justice doesn't want to set up criminal prosecution, so justice intervenes. Put someone as an interventor there, and if you behave well and fix the problems, typically they do that when they don't think you did it maliciously, they won't prosecute. And because of some charges on Medicare and Medicaid that they had there, and but we don't have a research group, so we don't know how to deal with improving this. Can you do it? I only asked one question. Do you have data? I didn't ask for money, and I should have asked for some. And they said we have as much data as you want. Okay, so they had a lot of data at that time. This was maybe, what was it, 19, it was 2002, no more like 2003, 2004. And so Professor Kogan and myself started working with that, did the continuity equation paper, and basically we got data from one warehouse that they had, and 10 hospitals that are being fed by that warehouse, and ran continuity equations to the system, predicted usage, detected aberrations, studied if it was better to do it daily, monthly, weekly, or whatever, did all kind of things, did prevention of errors, did automatic correction of errors. That's why the paper I said, break it down. Okay, one do the continuity equation, the other one do automatic error correction. But we want to do it together, that was maybe slower. But we continue doing that type of thing, was very useful for us. And I went to KPMG and said, hey, I found a company. And they were good. 3 weeks later, we had support. And they have supported us since then. They still have KPMG support, and they work with us. Although they are great, but they don't take advantage of some things that we develop. It's very difficult. In all our projects, we have this difficulty. We do some great things with companies, and then it's difficult for them integrate it into their processes. It's technology absorption. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. Even if you know the right thing to do, you are already used to do a certain way, or if you know, improve that. So this kind of technology absorption is quite difficult. And we find this all the time. So I'm not going to go to these details. I'm just going to talk about for Itau-Unibanco for a second. This is quite old. I actually had much more process. But this is a whole set of projects we did in data analytics. And this, we just stopped working with them last year, so we have worked maybe 13 years with them. And we did projects in insurance. We did projects in credit cards. We did projects this was a real cool project, and I've had to convince the state of California to do that for municipality monitoring. And what we did, Itau-Unibanco at that time had 1,400 branches. So we developed 18 ratios, and every night we ran those ratios. And if the ratios were negative, meaning we created a thing we call suspicion function, and if this thing happens, gets 1 bad point, if this thing happens, get 5 bad points, and add them together. And they wanted the highest suspicion functions, the branches got on. And they had a yearly plan of what this was published in the thing book that we're going to get. And then with this whole thing on transitory accounts, we did a big study about what program we are going to do, and we went to management, and this guy, chairman of the audit committee, immediately said, you do transitory accounts. It wasn't even something but it turns out that they had a problem in transitory account. These are accounts that you close, and they had like a nearly material error in a quarterly report because they had $50 million sitting on an account that didn't get counted. So they wanted kind of monitoring of the transitory accounts. It was a great project, but they had these mainframe systems, and if we ran our analytics on that, we would bring them to the knees. So what we did is we collected just summaries, and Yan-Bang Kim in his dissertation calculated what should be the standards for those summaries, and if the summary came out too much out of the standard, then we downloaded that transitory account for that entire day, and then we analyzed the hell out of it. but not in the mainstream. We call it upstream, downstream, or in this case, local system. And so that's what we did there. Okay, and this is a whole set of Unibanco projects. I'm running out of time, so I think I just want to show you one more thing. Actually, this is a report, sorry, it's a little bit in Portuguese, but this is a report that they were running every night in the bench monitoring thing. And what they basically did is they collected all of these as alerts. And what they did is they examined one by one. They had these 3 people doing that over there. They examined one by one and decided this was real alert or there was some attenuating circumstances. And I don't have time to tell you about them. And so basically these were the ones that they considered real alert. These ones, they said, okay, no big problem. And what they did with each one of them, they sent it to the immediate supervisor of that region of the branches. So there were, I don't know, 20 branches per region, the immediate supervisor. He was supposed to in one day take action about it. In the beginning they didn't, but Unibanco was tough about that and made them do it. So it was very interesting, and this will come night after night, continuous examination of accounts. They presented this to their top managers. They claimed that for every dollar they spent on this project, they saved $10. That was their argument of it. Actually, I thought it was an understatement. They saved much more. Okay. So I'm going to stop here. You have these slides. You can have a look at them, etc. You also get the thick book for having some